Hello everyone, welcome to this tutorial. Now in this video I'll be talking about Git and Github. So before we go any further, please leave a like and smash the subscribe button. So in order to get started with Git and Github, you need to have it downloaded in your computer. So to download Git, you go to the website. I'll leave the link in the description below, and you download it depending on your operating system. You download the version suitable for your operating system. So now let's go back to our folder. Now, and this is the folder where we're going to initialize Git in. So I'm just going to get rid of my old Git bash. So you're going to open Git bash. So once you're finished installing Git, you should have Git bash on your computer. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move into this directory over here. So those of you that are not familiar with command line, so cd basically means change directory. So it's my way of telling the computer that, look, I want to go to this folder. So the folder is in documents, and in documents you find the folder Git lessons. So go to that folder. So that's where we are right now. So in order to start using Git, the first thing you're going to go with is a git init. So git init basically creates a Git folder. I'll dive into that a bit in more depth. But let's start with first, what is Git? Git is a version control system. And Git acts like a time machine, essentially. It creates checkpoints. They're not really called checkpoints in Git, but that's the analogy. It creates checkpoints, like similar to checkpoints in video games, where peradventure you make an error in your code or a bug, you could go back in time, and when you go back in time, the bug won't exist. It can be a lifesaver when it comes to programming. So that's what Git is. Now, a disclaimer here: Git and GitHub are not the same thing. So let's continue with that. So in order to start using Git, your first command you need is git init. So this initializes a Git repository. Now, you might ask yourself, what is a Git repository? So a Git repository is essentially a Git folder. So once you're done with the Git repository, we've created a Git repository. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a file in this repository. So right now, I'm going to come over here with code dot, and as I come over here with code dot, I'm going to create a new folder. The name of our folder is going to be test.py. Now, in test.py, I'm going to create a function called add, and I'm going to use the pass statement. So this is a function that I have created. Now, let's go back to git bash. So the next command I'm going to teach you is git status. So as the name implies, it's going to show us the status of our repository. So the first thing we see here is that we have no commits yet, and you see that we're on tracked. We have untracked files. So there are two types of files in Git: tracked and untracked. So tracked files are essentially files that GitHub is responsible for, but if this file is untracked, if a file is untracked, it means that Git is not responsible for that file. So next thing we're going to do is to stage the file. So by staging the file, you're essentially tracking the file. You get? So there are two ways you could do this. Since we have only one file, we could do test.py, but usually when we're programming, we have more than one file in the folder, so it's best to go with dots. This is what I use most of the time, and it's even shorter. So now, this git add dot is used to stage the file, but if the file is untracked and you run this code, it not only stages the file, but it also tracks the file. So once I've done that and I run git status again, you could see that it is ready to be committed. Now, let me explain what staging a file means. Staging a file means that the file is ready to be committed. Remember when I used the checkpoint analogy? So, in GitHub, it's called commits. So, commits essentially act like checkpoints or snapshots in our code. So, we could revert back to every commit we make. We could go back to a particular commit, like a checkpoint in a video game, you understand? So, now we have git commits -m. That is it. So I'm just going to go with created test.py Yeah, we have a commit git status. You see, we don't have anything to commit because we have nothing staged. So that is the basic of Git. So first you track the file, then you stage the file, and then you commit the file. So now let's create one more commit. So the next thing I'm going to do is that I'm just going to return 1. Doesn't make sense, but we're not talking about Python, we're talking about Git. First, I'm going to commit this change. Now, let's say a file is already tracked. You have a file that's already tracked. If your goal is just to commit the file, instead of using git add and git commit, you can use this shortcut. So this shortcut allows you to commit and stage. So this shortcut allows you to stage and commit in one line. So I'm going to be returned 1. So keep in mind when using this shortcut that if the file is not tracked, that it's not going to work. Now, I'm just going to clear the screen. So if I do git status, you see that, sorry about that. You see that we have nothing to commit. We've already committed that previously. So now, let me introduce you to a new command. This command is called git log. So it gives us a list of all our commit statements. So now, you can see that we have 2 commit statements. The latest commit statement we made will appear earlier. I said that Git allows us to have checkpoints within our code. So now, this is our code now. Let's say I don't like this and I want to go back to what we had before. Remember, this is what we have right now. So what we're going to do is that we're going to go back in time. So I'm going to just copy, this is the commit ID, I'm just going to copy that. And I'm going to go to the next line. Before you do that, make sure that there's nothing to be committed. I'm going to go to the next line and use the command git checkout. And then I'm going to paste a commit ID. Sorry about that. I didn't paste the commit ID. I'm just going to try it again. So I want to go back in time to added test. So this is our first commit. So I'm going to copy this, and when I paste it, you see that we switched over. So when I come over here, you see that we went back in time. It's no longer showing return 1. So that is the power of Git, but we're just getting started. Now, let me introduce you to the concept of branches. We've seen branches earlier on. So I'm sure some of you might have been wondering, what is master? You may have been wondering what master is, and you've been wondering what this is. So these are essentially branches. So now the first command relating to branches we'll talk about is git branch. So you can see that we essentially have 2 branches in our code. But enough about that, let's talk about what branches are. So the best analogy to use in this scenario is, let's say you get an assignment from a professor, and as you get an assignment from a professor, you're meant to submit it in a particular piece of paper. Now, you can't do all your rough work, all your dirty work in the piece of paper you're going to submit to your professor. So what you would do is to do your piece of rough work on another page or another piece of paper or another notebook. And when you're done with your rough work, you transfer a more organized, a decent format of your work into the notebook you're going to submit to your professor. So that's essentially what branches are. So let's say we're coding, and I want to add in a new feature. Now, if you've been coding for a while, you know that when you're adding new features into your code, it could lead to bugs. Now, it won't make sense for you to do this on the working code base, because let's say you're working in a company, this is what people are going to be using. So if you do this on your main code base, you might have users reporting errors or reporting tickets as you're making the new features. So what the best thing to do is you create a new branch, and when you create a new branch, you work on that separate branch, and once you're done working on that separate branch, you merge. Merge means that merge is like transferring the work from the rough work to the main work. So that's essentially what branches are. So enough talk, now let's get coding. So git branch essentially lists the branches that we have in our code. So now we essentially created a new branch when we did git checkout. So let's say I go to git checkout master. You see that everything that appears here is a branch. So these are the two branches we created. So now this master branch is our main branch, and as we move to master branch, you see that return one is still here. So now I'm going to create a separate branch. So how we do that is git branch, and then we use a name. Any name that comes behind git branch is essentially the name of our new branch. So I'm just going to name our new branch new feature, and now we've created the git branch new feature. Next thing we're going to do is that we're going to check out to that new feature branch. So now you see that we're on the new feature branch. So in this new feature branch, I'm just going to add index.js, and when I do this, okay, so our screen was getting cloggy, so I decided to clear my screen. So what I did was this: I remember that we hadn't tracked the file, so I did when we git add, so I could add index.js. So now if you do run git status, you see that our file is staged and is ready to be committed. So I'm just going to commit, and I'm just going to go with added index.js, and you see that we've committed that to our file. But remember, we're in the new feature branch. Our master branch does not have this change. Remember, we're in a new feature branch, and our master branch does not have this change. So now, let's say that we want to add this change to our master branch. So we have to go to our master branch because that is the branch we want to see the change in. Then we're going to use a command called git merge, and we're going to merge new feature. And now we're done merging, and you see that if I should come over here to our master branch, remember I added index.js to, this is our master branch, I added index.js to our new feature branch, but now it's added to our master branch, and that's the beauty of Git. So performing merges on Git is not so straightforward, but because a lot of times you run into conflicts, but they are no big deal. So now my goal here is to create a conflict intentionally. So I'm going to add a new function, and when I add this new function, I'm just going to return this. So a conflict happens when there are two changes on the two different branches, and Git does not know which change to implement. So I've made a change here. When I make the change here, I'm going to commit that change. And when I commit the change, I'm just going to give it a name. Now I'm going to go to our master branch to make a small change as well. On this change, it doesn't matter if I wrote add here, I'm just going to go with subtract. I'm trying as my best to create a conflict because I haven't been successful in creating a conflict so far. So now I strongly believe I have created a conflict, so I'm just going to commit. Now I'm going to merge. I'm going to merge this to new feature. And you see that it says auto merging test.py, merge conflict in test.py. Now this is exactly what we wanted. So what merge conflicts mean is that Git does not know how to add these two blocks of code because there's a minus. I added a minus change in the master branch, and I also added a multiplication change in the new feature branch. So Git is kind of confused of which change. So it's basically Visual Studio helps us. So it's basically asking us, what should we do? Should we accept the current change? Should we accept the incoming change from the other branch? Should we accept both changes? Can we compare changes? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go with accept incoming change. Anytime you have a merge conflict, you do not need to go git merge again. All you need to do is commit. Once you've resolved the merge conflict, all you need to do is commit. So I'm going to go with conflict resolved. And you see conflict is resolved. You see everything works beautifully. Now you see that it no longer shows git merging. So now we are done. Let's say in the sequence of all this we decided to cancel our merge. We could go with git -- on abort. That was if we didn't want to continue on with the merging. Now let's look at remotes now. So what git allows us to do is to work and collaborate with others irrespective of their location in the world. So you might have heard of GitHub, and that's what we're going to be talking about next. So GitHub is basically a Git hosting server. So you could create your own private hosting server, but that's too expensive. So we're just going to use GitHub because GitHub is the most popular Git hosting service. So the first thing we're going to do is to create a GitHub account. So you can see I already have a Git profile. So all you need to do is to create a Git profile. It's not difficult. Then the next thing you're going to do is create a new repository. Remember, repository is a Git folder. But the difference between this repository and the repository on your computer is that this repository over here is a remote repository. So I'm just going to go with Git tutorial. And since I'm going to leave this as public, I'm not going to add a readme. So over here, they're telling us essentially how to push our local repository over here. But we've already done a lot of these steps already. So these are the only 2 steps we haven't done. So this part, I'm just going to copy this part directly. And when I copy this part directly, I'm going to go to git bash. And when I go to git bash, you see that this works for me. Sometimes this may not always work for you because you might have not configured GitHub before. So what you're going to do is git config global. Then as you go global, you go with name. This is the name other people will see. So I'm going to go with Chikama. And I'm going to go with email. I'm just going to go with Chikama Honorable at wiremail.com. So I don't need to do this because I've already connected Git to my computer before. But if this is the first time you're doing this, what might happen is that you might see a GitHub, you might see a panel to sign in and authenticate your GitHub credentials, because you can't just push to anybody's. You have to push to repositories that you have access to. So now this is very good. So right now I have connected my Git with this Git repository. Now my goal here is to push my code over to GitHub. So I'm going to copy this. And when I copy this, I'm going to paste it, but I'm going to change it because over here they're assuming that you have a branch called main, but the branch we have here is called master. So I'm going to use master. So this is essentially telling me that we are going to push to origin master. So origin is the name of our branch over here. You could give it a different name like upstream, but origin is what people normally use. And remember, we've added origin as this GitHub link. This is the same link. So it's not that easy to wrap your head around, but when you use it constantly, you understand. So The -u here just means that next time we won't have to put -u here. We can just go with origin master. So once I do this, I'll just have to be patient, and you see that GitHub gives us some information. And if I go over here and I reload, you see that our files have been pushed to GitHub. So that is beautiful. The next thing we're going to look at is pulling from GitHub. So how do we get a file from GitHub? So right now I'm going to create a new file, and the name of a file is going to be readme.md. And readme.md is a markdown file. So I'm just going to give some information. This is a Git tutorial file, and you can see I'm going to commit new file. It's going to be create readme.md. So I've created a new file and I'm going to commit it, and I'm committing it directly to the master branch. And you see over here that we have the new file here. But if you come to our local workspace, you see we do not have this file. Now, how do we collect this file from GitHub? So it's very similar to the way we pushed it. So we could just go to Git. First of all, we go with fetch, Git fetch. Next, you're going to go with Git merge. So you forget about this. This was an error on my part. So once you go with Git merge, you should see that the file readme.md should be in your computer. But this is the long way to do it. There's actually a shortcut, and that will be the last thing we'll be looking at in this video. So peradventure, I decide to edit it and come over here and write Git. This is a Git and GitHub tutorial. I'm just going to be updated, and I'm going to commit the change. Now, let's say I want to get this change as well. I can just, instead of going through all that stress of writing git fetch and then git merge, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go git pull origin master. Initially, I didn't want to show you this because I felt it to confuse you a bit. Merge is something you see too often when you're using Git, so I just want you to understand that. And once you're done with that, the change should be in your file. So that's about it. This is all you need when you're starting to learn Git. So thank you for your time.